Can you hear me, Commissioner Fielder?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So this is the second day of the hearing on the KELP petition. It is 9 o'clock. Today is December 14. We're continuing the second day of this hearing. I would ask at this point, as with every official commission meeting, if there is any public comment in the room. Is there any public comment online? No. I see we have 3 people who are connected online. We have Commissioner Fielder and I can't read that.
I believe that's Luke Hansen.
Okay, is any one of the parties, is anybody not online that you need to have online right now? Okay, good. So we're all set to go. So I think where we are at this proceeding is that Northwestern is presenting their case in chief. Proceed.
Thank you, Chairman O'Donnell. Northwestern calls Steve Schmidt to the stand.
All of the witnesses you're calling today were sworn in yesterday. Is that correct?
Not all, but Steve was. I'll let you know.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks. Steve, can you please say and spell your address for the record? Say and spell your name for the record, please.
Yes, Steve Schmidt, Steve, S-T-E-V-E, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-T-T.
And who are you employed by?
Northwestern Energy.
And what's your title?
I'm the manager of energy supply planning.
And in front of you, do you see the document in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Do you know what that is?
Yes, this is my testimony.
Do you have any changes you'd like to make?
Not at this time.
If I asked you those same questions today, would the responses be the same?
Yes, they would.
This time I'd like to introduce Steve's testimony as Northwestern Exhibit 1, Hearing Exhibit 1.
Objections? Okay, so ordered.
And at this time, I'd open this witness available for cross-examination.
Good morning, Mr. Schmidt.
Good morning.
Mr. Schmidt, just to prepare us for today, I've placed in front of you so you can readily find them. What's been marked there is KELP exhibits 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 being the petition, 2, 3, and 4 being the pre-filed testimony of Misters Gorman and Collins. Do you have those in front of you, sir?
Yes, I do.
Then we'll also be discussing through the course of our investigation what I've had marked for identification as KELP exhibit 5, which should be next to you there. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Last but not least, in the pile on your far right there should be, I think on the top tab, the discovery response that's already been introduced in this case as the KELP response to Northwestern's request number 37. Do you have that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. Just keep those all handy. That'll make this go more smoothly. I'd like to start by taking a look at your testimony, and if you would please refer to page 9 of your testimony and let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
At lines 10 and 11 on page 9, you testify that Northwestern does not need capacity from Kelp to serve its load until 2032. Is that correct?
Correct.
I want to talk to you about that testimony for a bit. Let's start by turning to what's been marked for identification as Kelp Exhibit 5. You see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And can you identify what that is for the record?
This is Northwestern Energy's comments.
And can you identify what docket those comments were filed in?
Docket number 2022.09.087.
Am I correct that that's a commission investigation into the Montana Resource Adequacy and Risk Profile?
Yes, that's what it says.
Are you familiar with that docket?
To some extent.
You're generally familiar with the fact that Northwestern filed comments in that proceeding?
Generally, yes.
I'd move the admission of of Kelp Exhibit 5.
Objections?
No objection.
So ordered.
I'd like to call your attention to the first page of that exhibit. And it's under the caption Introduction. There's a sentence begins the Northwestern region. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Could you please read that sentence ending at the footnote 1 for the record?
The Northwest region faces a looming resource adequacy shortfall as traditional thermal generation continues to retire. Large amounts of intermittent renewable resources replace that dispatchable generation. Drought conditions persist in a region with considerable reliance on hydroelectric generation, and extreme weather events increase in frequency and magnitude.
And as you sit here today, do you agree with that sentence?
Generally, yes.
What parts of that sentence do you disagree with?
I just want to recognize the fact that it's a regional statement.
Okay. Give me just one moment. Okay. Can you please look at page 2 of those comments? Do you see there on the bottom of page 2, 3 lines from the bottom, a sentence beginning over the past several years?
Yes, I do.
All right. Can you please read that sentence for the record?
Over the past several years, Northwestern has expressed its concern to the commission in several forums about the need for cost-effective and sufficient capacity resources to serve customers, especially as the region continues to transition away from coal and toward more variable energy resources.
Do you agree with that sentence?
Yes, I do.
Can you please now turn to page 4? You see there on page 4, there's a full paragraph beginning as the commission is aware.
Yes.
Would you please read for the record the second sentence of that paragraph, starting with the words coal retirements?
Coal retirements, increases in wind and solar, and decarbonization policies are among the most important factors contributing to the energy transition.
And could you please read the next sentence as well?
While coal retirements and VER growth have been happening across the region for years, the pace and magnitude of change is intensifying, resulting in increased challenges for utilities to plan for and maintain an adequate and reliable power system while accommodating future uncertainty.
Do you agree with those 2 sentences?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You can set that aside. Relative to the issue of before us, both the issue of the capacity need as well as the issue of the proposed PPA that you discuss in your testimony. I'm curious, as a generic principle, are you generally familiar with the Kelp power plant and how it operates?
Generally, yes.
So I just want to explore that a little bit and understand the degree of your familiarity with the plant. Do you understand that Kelp generates electricity by burning what is known as waste coal?
Yes.
Do you understand that the coal that is burned at the facility is produced by the Rosebud mine, which also serves the Colstrip power plant?
Yes.
Are you aware that Kelp burns coal from the mine that cannot be sold to or used by the Colstrip power plant because of its relatively poor quality? Correct?
Yes.
That's why the coal is called waste coal, correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that the Rosebud mine is able to gain economic value by selling the waste coal to Kelp and thereby help the overall economics of its business?
Objection. This has nothing to do with Northwestern's avoided costs. This has nothing to do with the cost that the Rosewood mine charges Colstrip. Excuse me. This case is about Northwestern's costs, not anybody else's.
Mr. Nelson, having heard that, is your line of questioning relevant to the points that Mr. Hensley brought up?
So the issue here is that the underlying purpose of PURPA is to promote qualifying facilities. And I believe that as it relates to waste coal, the impacts of the coal economy in general and on the associated mines is part of the reason why PURPA exists. It clearly doesn't go to the specific issue of the avoided cost in the case, but I would argue that this case, as it relates to implementing PURPA, is broader than just a calculation of avoided cost. And that's the purpose of this question.
Okay, so now that I know the purpose, I would like to expound on my objection that this commission, FERC has the sole authority to determine whether a QF is a QF, and that's where the waste coal comes in. And I believe that Kelp was able to sustain an objection in discovery on that same basis. So I don't think they should be, just like they'd be judicially stopped in a court. I think they should be administratively stopped from now claiming that this should be entered into the evidence in this case.
You raise good points, but I think I'm going to overrule at this point. I'm intrigued by the thread of Mr. Nelson's questioning, if it gets to the points that you have raised. Thank you.
Can you ask the question again?
Of course. Would you believe that would you expect that the ability of the Rosebud mine to gain economic value from selling the waste coal it creates to Kelp helps improve the overall economics of that business?
As a general principle, it seems like that would be logical.
To avoid any further fight, we'll just leave it at that. You familiar with the history of the sale of electricity from Kelp to the Montana Power Company and ultimately Northwestern?
In its specifics, maybe not, but generally, yes.
Okay. Are you generally aware that Northwestern and its predecessor, the Montana Power Company, have been purchasing electricity from Kelp and its predecessors since 1990, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree, that although there have been a variety of disputes between the two entities and their predecessors over the years, that Northwestern's testimony in this case has not alleged that Kelp is currently in violation of the agreements between the company, correct?
In all of our testimony, I can't confirm that for sure.
Okay, well, let's start with your testimony.
Okay.
Your testimony does not contain any allegation that Kelp is currently in violation of the agreements between the companies, correct?
Correct.
And would it be helpful, would you prefer if I asked the other witnesses that question as to their testimony? Is that what you're saying in terms of your comfort level in answering this question?
Yeah.
Very good. Are you generally familiar, at least in the recent years, with how much electricity Northwestern purchases from Kelp?
Yes.
If I could ask you to refer to what's in front of you as Kelp 2, which is the direct testimony of Mr. Gorman. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And then on the back of that testimony, and I apologize, this wasn't tabbed, that would have been easier. But in that testimony, there's blue sheets that separate the testimony from his exhibits. Do you see those, sir?
Yes, I do.
All right. If I could just ask you to page back through the exhibits to exhibit MPG 5. And please let me know when you have that in front of you. Oh, I'm sorry. I misspoke. It's MPG 3.
Okay.
So close. All right. Would you agree with me that MPG 3 includes a series of tables that document the energy sales and peak capacity associated with those sales between, or sales from Kelp to Northwestern between the years 2007 to 2021, correct?
That's what the table indicates.
And do you see there at the, on the first page, page 1 of 6, at the bottom, the exhibit shows or states its source. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And that source is described as Northwestern Energy Montana Qualifying Facility Payment Invoices from January 2007 through December of 2021, correct?
Yes.
Now, at the time you filed your testimony, you had Mr. Gorman's direct testimony before you, did you not?
Yes.
And you did not dispute any of the numbers or the calculations stemming from these invoices as presented in Mr. Gorman's testimony, correct?
Correct.
Now, an invoice from Northwestern to Kelp, that shows the dollars that Northwestern is paying Kelp month over month for the energy and capacity that Kelp delivers, correct?
I'm not seeing an invoice in front of me, but generally an invoice, that's what would be on an invoice.
But you understand that in general, the commercial relationship between Kelp and Northwestern is Kelp is the seller and Northwestern is the buyer.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So that means Northwestern generally pays Kelp
Yes.
for its energy and capacity, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if you paid for the energy and capacity, would I be correct in assuming that that means it was energy and capacity sold and delivered to Northwestern and not some other company?
Yes.
You're not in the business of paying for power that goes to somebody else, are you?
I'm not aware of why Northwestern would invoice or remit a payment to Kelp for energy sold to another party.
Fair enough. All right. On pages 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, do you see that there is a discussion of the annual invoiced amounts, the generation and the monthly peak capacity, starting with the year 2007, and then continuing on through page 6 to the years 2021, correct?
Yes, I see tabular data of monthly generation in megawatt hours.
So I want to just call your attention to some of the recent years. Can you please turn to page 5 of 6 of that exhibit and let me know when you're there?
I'm there.
Would you agree with me that in, for example, in 2018, in January, March, April, May, June, July, and September, the Northwestern invoices reflected a monthly peak capacity from Kelp of 40 megawatts or greater, correct?
Correct.
Let's take a look at 2019. On the next page, do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And again, in 2019, would you agree with me that Northwestern invoices reflected a monthly peak capacity in November and December of 40 megawatts or over.
That's indicated here.
And then in 2020, same sort of question, January and September, both of those months showed over 40 megawatts or over, correct?
Yes.
And then in 2021, May, September, November, and December were, again, 40 megawatts or over in terms of the capacity delivered, correct?
Yes, I'm not entirely sure what that monthly peak capacity is a measure of, if it is indeed the instantaneous monthly peak, or I would need further clarification on exactly what that column is indicating.
Would you agree with me? I mean, we'll sort this out, that it has to be either an instantaneous peak or an average peak, right?
I can't confirm those are the only two possibilities.
Okay. But if it's an average, if it's an instantaneous peak, then we know what that is. If it's an average peak, that means that during the course of that month, the actual peak could have been higher or lower than those numbers, right?
Yes.
In November of 2021, do you see that Northwestern's invoice reflected a monthly peak capacity of 40.7 megawatts?
Yes, I do.
Based on the fact that Northwestern paid Kelp based on these invoices, do you have any reason to dispute the fact that that is a reflection of the energy and capacity actually delivered to Northwestern during these time periods?
I don't dispute that fact. However, I would just question a little bit with the monthly peak capacity represented in the months you pointed out greater than 40, for example. If that was a capacity that was always available there, or if it was just an instantaneous kind of a capacity.
And I appreciate that, but just to make sure that we all understand, regardless of whether it was an instantaneous capacity or a consistent capacity, either way, that reflects the maximum amount that at any moment was delivered, or at least that amount, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if I could ask you to set that aside, and then we're going to turn to the Kelp response to Northwestern 37, which is in the packet there on your right. And in particular, if I could call your attention past the blue page to the attachment that was provided with that data response. Do you see what's beyond there, sir?
I'm going to just object to the extent that this data response clearly contains a lot of legal conclusions, and we've continually raised this objection throughout this proceeding. So to the extent he's getting into this question into those portions of this data response, I'm going to object.
I had trouble understanding your words. What were you saying?
Oh, I'm going to object to the extent he's bringing up this data response. It has a lot of legal conclusions that we have continually objected to being admitted as evidence in this matter. So to the extent his question is going towards those legal conclusions and opinions in here, I'm going to object.
Nelson?
Yes, if it helps Commissioner O'Donnell and Mr. Hensley, the questions I intend to ask this witness about are purely related to the attachment and Northwestern's annual reports. I do not intend to ask him any questions about the arguments that are raised in the substance of the response, to which I understand Mr. Hensley has concerns.
If that's the case, then I'll withdraw my objection.
Thank you. Great. Proceed.
So beyond the blue tab there, do you see a collection of documents which have a cover page and then a excerpt page going back several years?
Yes, I do.
All right. And are you aware, sir, that Northwestern files an annual report with the Montana Public Service Commission?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And are you aware generally that that report includes what is called a Schedule 34, which is a discussion of the electric supply resources that Northwestern has utilized to serve Montana customers during the year of the report?
I'm not familiar with this particular report.
But you see on there in the Schedule 34s, a discussion of the power plants that serve Montana customers, including a collection of qualifying facilities, correct?
Yes, I do.
Do you see there, if I could call your attention to page 3 of 12 of that exhibit, which is the report from 2020 and the Schedule 34 attached to that? Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Can you please read what Northwestern reported as KELP's maximum billing demand during 2020 based on the information contained in Schedule 34?
In this report, I see an average monthly billing demand in megawatts of 40.2 and an annual energy of 270,832 megawatt hours.
So again, if this is an average and not an instantaneous demand, would you agree with me that that means that the instantaneous demand has to be at least 40.2 megawatts?
Not being familiar with this report and where these numbers came from, I can't verify that, but generally speaking, on the principle of averages, what you say would be correct.
Can you please look at the next page for the 2019 report and indicate what Northwestern told the commission the KELP billing demand was in 2019?
Average monthly billing demand for Colstrip Energy Ltd / Montana One, 40.4 in megawatts.
Same question for the next page, 2018. What did Northwestern report to the commission as KELP's peak demand?
40.2 in megawatts.
2017, what did the Northwestern Energy report to the commission as KELP's peak demand?
KELP's peak demand, I'm not sure. What I'm reading here is an annual peak of megawatts of 40.1.
Apologize. Thank you for that clarification. And then finally, for 2016, what did Northwestern report as the capacity from KELP?
Annual peak in megawatts of 39.9.
Do you have any reason to doubt that Northwestern accurately reported KELP's, the energy and capacity it received from KELP during those years in this report you provide to the commission?
No reason to doubt that.
Now, looking at, you can set that aside. We're done with that. Thank you. Under the current PPA, regardless of the instantaneous peaks that KELP may be operating under, it is correct to say that the current PPA contemplates that Northwestern only pays KELP for an average annual capacity of 35 megawatts over the course of the contract year, correct?
I don't believe I testified to the current PPA of KELP. The discussion yesterday was in regards to the average at 35 megawatts.
But, well, do you understand that the current contract contemplates Northwestern paying KELP for an average annual capacity of 35 megawatts over the course of the contract year?
Objection. He's again asking the witness to render a legal conclusion and adding the word average into the contract when that doesn't even exist. So he's taking his own, and counsel's taking his own interpretation of the contract and then asking my witness to verify that.
What Yeah, he's not asking for his legal opinion, but his understanding of the legal situation, but I'll sustain the objection.
Can you please turn to Kelp Exhibit 4, which is Mr. Collins' testimony, and let me know when you have that in front of you.
Okay, I do.
Can you please turn to Exhibit BCC 2, which will be behind the little blue pages, and let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
You were present in the hearing room yesterday, were you not?
Yes, I was.
You recall the discussion in the hearing that we had, that Mr. Collins had with your counsel regarding this commission decision that's included in his testimony?
Generally, yes.
Can you please look at page 19 of 28 of that exhibit? Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
So in this document, do you see where it says, it is hereby determined that under the agreement here at issue, as amended, MPC is obligated to purchase from the Kelp project at rates determined in the agreement, as amended, a maximum of 35,000 kW of annual contract capacity and a maximum of 306,600,000 kilowatt hours of annual contract energy. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Based on your general understanding of the way Kelp operates, which you indicated earlier, do you understand that sometimes Kelp operates at above 35 megawatts on an instantaneous basis, and sometimes Kelp operates below 35 megawatts on an instantaneous basis, correct?
That's my general understanding, yes.
Do you also understand that as a general matter, if over the course of the contract year, Kelp has operated on average higher than 35 megawatts, that in order to comply with the contract, once Kelp reaches 306,600,000 kilowatt hours, then Kelp stops selling electricity to Northwestern for the rest of the contract year to avoid exceeding the 35,000 kW annual contract capacity?
Objection. He's calling for a legal conclusion again. He's asking for that. He's taking the application of how the facts, how Kelp has operated consistently throughout the years and trying to have my witness say that that is compliant with this contract. That is an absolute legal conclusion.
I'm actually not asking him whether it complies with the contract. I'm asking him if they physically sell more than 35 kW during the start of the year, then shut down and stop. That's what I'm trying to ask. And that when they do that, well, let's just start. We'll take it in two
If you
parts.
rephrase, that's
Okay.
fine.
So we'll start with that first part. Do you agree that Kelp, as they operate, runs at the beginning of the year, sometimes higher than 35 megawatts? And as they go through the year, once they reach 306,600,000 kilowatts, then Kelp stops selling electricity to Northwestern, right?
I can't verify that they've actually complied with that, but generally there is that maximum megawatt hours of energy delivered during a contract year. And that also when Kelp generates above 35 megawatts, it creates issues on Northwestern's system as a general principle.
Okay.
However, I can't testify to the interconnection issues created.
Okay. And what I'm asking you to try to testify to is what Northwestern actually buys from Kelp. Okay. We'll set aside the legal argument about what that means. I'm just trying to figure out what you actually buy. And over the course of the year, sometimes you buy energy that on an instantaneous basis is greater than 335 megawatts, correct?
We buy on a kilowatt hour basis or a megawatt hour basis. So on an instantaneous, during any given instant, it may be higher than 35 megawatts.
Right. And that's what we saw, for example, in the reports that Northwestern files with the commission about the capacity that kelp provides, correct? Those numbers were greater than 35, right?
In that exhibit that I was reading, yes, they were.
And then having said that, when we get to 306,600,000 kilowatt hours over the course of a contract year, would I be correct that Northwestern will stop paying kelp for any other energy that is delivered beyond the contract maximum?
I can't verify if that's exactly what the existing contract states, but I do generally know of this limitation in here. I don't know what the provision is if there's a generation above that.
Would I be correct that if you take 306,600,000 and divide that by 8,760, the number of hours in a year, that equals 35,000, correct?
There was testimony yesterday affirming that, and without doing the math right here at the second, I think that's probably correct.
So taking perhaps subject to check, if you would, that is correct. Would you agree with me that hypothetically, if kelp delivered over the course of a contract year, 306,600,000 kilowatt hours in, say, the first 11 months of the year, and then stopped delivering electricity for the remainder of the year, then over the course of that year, on average, kelp would have delivered 35,000 kW to Northwestern, correct?
I'm not sure that what you said actually is correct, because you just said, you talked about 306,600,000 kilowatt hours of energy delivered over less than 8,760 hours is what you said.
That's right. So let me try this again. So for 11 months, they deliver 306,600,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Then for the 12th month, they deliver 0. You have that in mind.
Yes, I do.
Okay. When you average the 12 months, a year, that number of kilowatt hours over 8,760 hours will equal 35,000 kilowatts on average.
Yes. Yes. We just stated that. Yes.
Okay. You can set that aside and let's go back to your testimony, please. Can I please ask you to refer to page 26 of your testimony? Are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm there.
All right. So at page 26, starting at line 13, you have a portion of your testimony that discusses the avoided cost of capacity and capacity payments. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And then starting on line 19, again, consistent with the other portion of your testimony we've already reviewed, you indicate that there is this date of 2032 when Northwestern will need additional capacity. And then that is the triggering event under Northwestern's proposal for capacity payments to be provided to kelp. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Now, let's go back to page 15 of your testimony. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Page 15, and if it helps, you can refer back a few pages before. This is a section of your testimony you might recall where you're discussing the various resources that Northwestern has or is planning to acquire generally through the 2021 timeframe. You recall that testimony, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And at the bottom of 15, you specifically refer to the Beartooth battery. And you ask yourself the question, please explain why the Beartooth battery is included in this proposal. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And you explain then on the top of page 16 that in April 2021, Northwestern executed a contract with Beartooth Energy Storage LLC for the Beartooth battery, which provides a commercial operation date of October 2023, correct?
Yes,
As we sit here today, we now know that the Beartooth battery project is not proceeding forward, correct?
correct.
Did you know that at the time you wrote this testimony?
The significance of April 20, I'm sorry, of the Beartooth battery is that we took a snapshot in time of our generation portfolio as of the established Leo, the Leo date that Kelp stated in April of 22. As of that time, the Beartooth battery was in our resource stack.
And I appreciate that, but that wasn't my question. At the time you wrote this testimony, okay, which was filed in September of this year, did you know that the Beartooth battery project was not going forward?
I don't believe I knew that. I want to say the time frame for the Beartooth battery was in October.
So subsequent to you writing this testimony, it was determined, or it occurred, that the Beartooth battery project is not proceeding, correct? Now,
Correct.
So given the fact that we know that this project is not going forward, is it still your position that the fact that this project once was thought to be going forward should act to deny Kelp the right to receive a capacity payment to Northwestern?
It is still my position that that is the case, that the Beartooth battery should be included. And because of the standard practice of this commission, we take a snapshot in time of our supply stack when the Leo is established. And as Kelp demonstrated, their Leo was established in April of 2022. So that snapshot in time included the Beartooth battery. So it is still my position that it should be included.
Okay, so let's look at page 19 of your testimony. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
So on page 19, you ask yourself the question, starting at line 14, what would happen if the commission disregarded the resources referred to above when calculating Kelp's avoided cost? Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And you say on line 19, on line 17, if other resources are not accounted for and later come online, they will be providing the capacity that Kelp receives credit for providing. Kelp will be receiving capacity payment for the same avoided capacity provided by another resource instead of its incremental value as contemplated by PURPA. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Would you agree with me that as we sit here today, there is no reason to believe that the Beartooth battery project will ever receive a capacity payment by Northwestern?
Yes, as of today, I would agree with that.
Okay, so for Beartooth, that's not a problem, right?
Correct.
Let's go to the next Q&A. You say, who will bear the additional expenses under that scenario? Flipping onto the top of page 20, you say customers would bear the burden of double paying for the same capacity. Do you see that?
I do see that.
All right. As to Beartooth, no double payment's going to occur, right? Because Beartooth is not going to move forward, correct?
To do what you're suggesting and remove the Beartooth battery as of the claimed Leo date would be changing the common practice of this commission. So I would not recommend that we do that because it would create a lot of chaos in our process for calculating incremental additions to our portfolio.
Okay. Again, that wasn't my question. As it relates to Beartooth, you would agree with me that there will be no double payment if we remove Beartooth from consideration, because there will be no payment ever, as we know here today, to Beartooth, right?
I would agree there would be no double payment, but what you're suggesting would be a deviation from the standard practice.
Okay. So would you agree with me that in the past, the commission has decided that when you're looking at what goes in the Leo stack, You should not remove something from the Leo stack if it still might be developed, like it's in progress of being developed. Would that be fair?
Yes, it would.
Have you ever seen the commission decide not to remove a project from the stack where it wasn't just theoretically possible that the project wouldn't occur, but the project actually was canceled?
Can you ask that again?
Sure. Do you have a single instance in mind where this commission has decided not to remove from the stack of resources for purposes of calculating a Leo, a project that wasn't just contingent or had risk, but it was a project that actually was fully terminated? Has that ever happened in your experience?
Not knowing the full history, no, I can't think of an instance.
Okay. Can I please ask you to go to KELP Exhibit 3, which is the testimony of Mr. Gorman, his rebuttal testimony, and let me know when you have that in front of you.
I have it.
Could I please ask you there again, behind the blue pages, you should find Exhibit MPG 8. If you could just let me know when you chase that down.
I have it.
Do you understand MPG 8 to be a transcript from a Northwestern Corporation Q3 2022 earnings call?
That's what it indicates.
Okay. Just for the commission's edification, and if you know, what is an earnings call?
This appears to be Q3 of 2022 transcript of essentially a summary of the quarter's performance.
No, I'm saying, I'm asking a broader question. Do you know what an earnings call is?
Generally, yes.
Okay, and what is it?
It's a financial report from the company to typically it's investors, and others can listen in typically as well.
Okay, so in an old school world, it's like it's a phone call, a communication between Northwestern and your investors, correct?
Yes.
And then in addition to the transcript, if you can slide over to page 12 of that exhibit, you see what I'm guessing is a PowerPoint slide deck.
Yes.
And that's also labeled 2022 third quarter earnings webcast.
Yes.
Apparently we've moved beyond telephone calls to webcasts. Is that correct?
I suppose so.
Excellent. All right. And so do you understand that this slide deck would have been presented to the investors while they were running through the call? Is that correct?
That's likely the case, although I didn't sit in on this call.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Can I please ask you to look at page 50 of that exhibit?
It appears to end on page 45.
No, so I'm sorry. If you
Oh.
look at the exhibit
Oh, I
page
see.
numbers on the top, it's MPG 8, page 50 of 56.
I see it.
Very good. That is a slide deck which is entitled De-risking the Montana Capacity Deficit. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
The information presented here, would you agree with me, is communicating to investors the steps that Northwestern has taken to address the capacity deficit in Montana. Would you agree with that generally?
Yes.
And would you also agree with me that on the right-hand column in the red box, the document says this: we expect to submit an updated integrated resource plan by the end of 2022 or early 2023. A little asterisk there that we'll come to. Followed by, and then this is underlined, an all source competitive solicitation request for capacity available in 2026. Do you see that, sir?
I do see that.
A little italics, just so the record is clear, is that it is noted as to the timeline that due to the significant impact of our ownership in Colstrip Unit 4, to the capacity available in our portfolio, the outcome in the arbitration amongst the co-owners may affect the timing of the submission of this plan.
I do see that.
Okay. So at this investor presentation, Northwestern announced to your investors that at the end of 2022 or in early 23, an updated IRP would be submitted, followed by an all-source competitive solicitation request for capacity available in 2026, right?
Yes, and it's heavily caveated with some what ifs here.
The what if relating to the arbitration, so
Mhm.
could change. Okay, would you agree with me that 2026 is 6 years earlier than 2032?
Yes, I would, but I think it would be a mistake to conflate the way the QF procedure works with stacking QFs in our Leo queue. So there's a difference here between the need for Northwestern for capacity in the near term and the planning process for QFs in our Leo queue as they stack up, because we don't have control whether of those QFs ever actually come online. If we have a capacity deficit, we have to take steps to become resource adequate. So the difference here that we need to articulate is that this slide is not in reference to the QF process and procedure. This slide is in reference to Northwestern's current need for capacity outside of the QF process.
Okay, so is it your testimony that if all of the QFs ahead of kelp in the queue, as you define it, if they all come online, then Northwestern will cancel the competitive solicitation for capacity in 2026 because you won't need it?
Objection, he's requiring the witness to speculate.
Well, I'm addressing the point that the witness just made, which is the linkage between these 2 points. And I don't think that calls for speculation. I think it has to do with whether he knows that that's the company's plan.
It has to do with exactly speculation, because you're speculating as to whether those resources will all come online.
Well, it seems to me that the nature of this witness's job at the company requires him to do some forward estimation on this. So if we're asking, well, if he has incorporated that, it seems to me that that would be appropriate. So I'll overrule the objection.
I would state that this is not generally an IRP is followed by an RFP. And then we heavily caveat that with we have to evaluate the needs of the system and what might some major factors that could affect our capacity position. So there's no guarantee that an RFP would be issued immediately after we issue the IRP. It's just saying it's possible that an RFP would be issued. And depending on the development of QFs in our queue and other ongoing development in our supply stack, it's possible that we don't issue an RFP.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, but what you told investors is that you expect to submit an IRP followed by an all source solicitation. That's what you told your investors, isn't it?
Heavily caveated with the development of what's listed here as the significant impact of the ownership of Colstrip.
Okay. And that box in red, that addresses what happens in 2026. The boxes in the middle show that prior to that, up to 2025, there's a box, for example, in the middle of the 3 blue boxes that shows that you expect to acquire 200 megawatts of potential QFs and increased accredited capacity of existing resource. Do you see that, sir?
I do see that.
So the QFs that you're talking about, that's already baked into this because it's part of that 200 megawatt blue box, isn't it?
I'm not sure what all elements went into this 200 megawatt blue box. I didn't put this slide together.
Okay. And then there's also another 225 megawatt blue box for short and medium term capacity contracts. You see that, sir?
I see that.
You understand those to be the contracts that you discuss in your testimony?
That is likely the case here.
All right. So this slide takes into account potential QFs, takes into account the capacity contracts that you talk about in your testimony, and reaches the conclusion that the company still expects to submit an IRP by the end of 2022 or 23. The timing of the IRP is a little bit up in the air, followed by an all-source competitive solicitation request for capacity in 2026.
Objection, he's misstating the witness's pre-filed testimony. Witness's pre-filed testimony has 403 megawatts of QFs that those QFs we talked about yesterday, Trident, Upland, Dillon, and Broadview and Meadowlark. So clearly those aren't the ones that they're referring to in this exhibit. And my witness testified that he wasn't the one that put this together.
Yeah, I think the witness indicated that it was likely. So he wasn't stating any knowledge, but stating that it was likely. Do I understand that correctly?
So that's all true. And maybe I can ask you if that's the concern. Can I ask this? I'll withdraw the previous question and try again. Mr. Schmidt, would you expect that in the capacity calculations that are shown here on this page, would you expect that as for the QFs, this document is referring to the nameplate capacity of the units or the accredited capacity contribution from those units?
I'm just going to object one more time. I believe this witness already said he's not the one who put this together. It's calling for speculation as to what was put in here if he wasn't the one who did it.
Well, again, I'm going to overrule based upon that. It would seem to me that the witness's job at the company would require him to have a working knowledge of these without having been the author of them. It's information he has to deal with on a regular basis. If I'm not misunderstanding the nature of his position with the company.
The 200 megawatt blue box in this slide is labeled as potential QFs and increased accredited capacity of existing resources. So it is a mix of a variety of things. I can't speculate as to what all that 200 megawatts is comprised of. What I would say that from a capacity planning standpoint, with QFs in our queue, we don't know exactly which ones will be developed and which ones will not. So there's from a supply planning standpoint, that does introduce some difficulty into understanding the future state of our capacity position.
All right. If Northwestern, as you expect, submits a all-source competitive solicitation for capacity available in 2026, well, let me back up a second. So the chart talks about an IRP amendment in 2022 or early 2023, depending on the coal strip arbitration, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then it suggests that that would be followed by a solicitation, and it says for capacity available in 2026. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay. Now there's a significant lag between 2023 and 2026, right?
3 years.
Right. So why would it be the case that you would do a solicitation in, for example, 23 or 24 for capacity that you need in 2026?
Perhaps what they're referring to in 26 here is the earliest available they would expect an RF or a resource to come online.
Okay. And is it fair to say that if you want a resource to come online in 2026 and you're considering a potential new resource, that you have to do that solicitation process years in advance in order to make sure that there's time to select a project, contract with a project, and build a project, correct?
It would depend on the capacity resource. If it's a contract or a build out, the timeframes would differ significantly.
Well, sure. But what I'm saying is when Northwestern does a competitive solicitation, you do that many years before the identified need to accommodate the potential outcome that it takes time to construct and build the power plant, right?
In an ideal case, yes, if the time frame would allow for that. However, it would recognize that the portfolio may be in need of additional capacity prior to being able to actually execute an RFP and bring a contract or a project to fruition.
Okay, fair enough. If it goes forward as Northwestern expects and you do a competitive solicitation after the IRP for capacity to be brought online in 26, is it possible that Northwestern might bid into that solicitation, an owned resource?
It is possible.
Is it possible that Northwestern could bid into that RFP an expansion at the Dave Gates facility?
It is possible.
Is it possible that Northwestern could bid into that RFP an expansion at the Yellowstone generating facility?
Not knowing the details of the availability of that particular site or any particular project, I don't know for sure.
Is it possible?
I don't know.
Is it possible that Northwestern might bid into the RFP a new gas-fired resource located somewhere else, but which is operationally similar to the generators at Yellowstone?
It's possible.
Is it possible that someone other than Northwestern might bid into the RFP a gas-fired facility with operational characteristics similar to the generators at Dave Gates?
Yes.
Is it possible that someone other than Northwestern might bid into the RFP a gas-fired generator with operating characteristics similar to the generators at Yellowstone?
In the RFP, we typically would not allow any potential bidder.
Okay. Since the 50 megawatt unit at DGGS was identified in the 2019 IRP and the 2020 supplement as the resource with the lowest capital cost other than the projects that were proceeding forward at that time, does that fact guarantee that that would be the unit that would be selected in the upcoming RFP for capacity in 2026?
The RFP would take into consideration a number of factors that Northwestern's portfolio would need. It's not necessarily strictly capacity for the ideal resource for the portfolio.
Right. So is the answer to my question that the fact that the 50 megawatt unit at DGGS had the lowest capital cost does not, in fact, guarantee that that would be a resource selected in the upcoming RFP for the reasons you just explained, correct?
Because the theoretical RFP is not written and the evaluation criteria and matrix of what is needed has not been defined, it's impossible to know what would be selected in that RFP.
Okay. Now, if Northwestern needs capacity in 2026, or they think you will need capacity in 2026, as is suggested here, why not wait until the summer of 2025 to put out an RFP for capacity?
It's possible that we would wait until 2025 to put out an RFP for capacity, because what this slide is indicating is a potential timeline. It's not necessarily set in stone.
In the ordinary course of your business, if Northwestern in 2023 identified a capacity need in 2026, would you ordinarily wait until the summer of 2025 to seek to fill that capacity need?
It very much depends on how much capacity Northwestern is looking for. If it's a small amount of capacity, and we expect a contract could be signed to fulfill that need, for example, we may not need or expect a longer lead time.
If you had enough need that, for example, you might want to build a new 50 megawatt unit at DGGS, wouldn't it be the case that you would need to make that decision prior to the summer of 2025 if you wanted that facility to come online in 2026?
To the extent that you're saying the timelines for an RFP build out takes longer than 1 year typically, I would agree with that.
And that is in fact all I'm saying. Okay, let's take a look at KELP Exhibit 1, which is the petition in this case. So you can set aside that document for a moment. And if you can find Exhibit 1 for me and let me know when you have that, that'd be great.
I have it.
And if I could ask you to turn to the first little blue tabby, which was Exhibit A. You see that?
I have it.
You understand Exhibit A to reflect a January 27th, 2021 letter from KELP to Mr. Travis Meyer at Northwestern, proposing an extension to the KELP contract beyond its current termination date. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. If you look at the on paragraph 1 of that agreement, in the sort of the middle of that paragraph, you see the sentence which says the current rates would be reduced for energy by 10% from the existing contract, and for capacity increased 25% on up to 38 megawatts. Do you see that?
I see that.
So would you understand KELP's proposal in this agreement to reduce the current energy price in the contract in exchange for increasing the current capacity rate in the contract, as well as increasing the total amount of capacity that's from 35 to 38 megawatts? Is that, would you understand that to be correct?
I see that's KELP's assertion.
Well, and you understand that that's their proposal to Northwestern, right?
I would not agree that's the total proposal. I see they're asserting the current rates would be reduced for energy by 10%. And for capacity increased 25%.
Okay. So would you understand if a project developer came to Northwestern and said, I would like a contract extension, I would like to, as part of the extension, agree to reduce my energy charge, increase my demand charge. You don't think that's a proposal relative to the economic terms of the extension?
I see that's an assertion of what KELP perceives as the benefit. What I don't see is an avoided cost request here. So that's it's an assertion by KELP, and I can't verify that the assertion is actually correct.
Okay. Okay, can you please look at Exhibit B on the next page?
Okay.
All right. So in Exhibit B, would you agree with me that Northwestern rejected KELP's proposal to extend the QF contract?
I agree that we're asking, well, let me read this really quick.
Sure.
I agree that we're saying, as we previously discussed, Northwestern is not in a position to extend KELP's contract until it gets closer to its expiration date.
Okay. So you rejected the request to extend the contract as was discussed in the prior letter, right?
Just in regards to the time frame.
Okay. The letter also states it is Northwestern's policy to negotiate new contracts or extensions within approximately 6 months of the expiration of new contracts. You see that, sir?
Of existing agreements.
Forgive me, existing agreements. Okay. That policy am I correct, is not written down anywhere.
Correct.
Who came up with that policy?
I'm not sure. It's generally a policy it's an unwritten policy that exists so that when we're calculating avoided costs, we can actually calculate the most accurate avoided costs possible, such that we're not calculating avoided costs so many years in advance that we can't calculate accurate avoided costs.
So do you not know who came up with this policy?
It's generally from the well, I can't say a name. I don't know exactly who came up with it.
Okay. Did this policy exist before you joined the company?
I joined the company in 2005. So I don't know how long the policy has been in place.
Okay. So you know when it was put into place.
I think it was put into place in response to QF's attempting to potentially negotiate way far out in advance. I don't know exactly when it was put into place.
Do you know of any other QF to whom you have made this statement that you will not negotiate with them until 6 months before the expiration of their contract?
We generally have QFs that will come to us looking for projects years out in advance. And in informal talks with them, we generally say, you know, if the project is so far out in advance, we won't necessarily go forward with it until it's, you know, in a timely fashion. These are just proposed projects. At that point, they're not necessarily even QFs.
And I understand that. I'm saying for an existing QF, have you ever, besides Kelp, refused to negotiate with that QF until 6 months prior to the expiration of the existing agreement, to your knowledge?
My knowledge of the existing QFs and their contract expiration and subsequent renewal is limited, so I can't testify to that.
So as far as you know, Kelp is the only QF to whom Northwestern has applied, and excuse me, the only existing QF to whom Northwestern has applied this unwritten policy, as far as you know, right?
Generally, yes. Mhm.
Now,
And as far as I know, the contract expiration term of an existing QF has not come up in my tenure in this position.
at the end of the letter here, you see where it says, as the expiration of the current contract draws closer, Kelp may request an updated avoided cost calculation and a draft PPA to review, right?
I see that.
Can you turn to Exhibit C? You understand that in September 29th of 2021, another offer was provided from Kelp to this time Mr. Robert Rowe for the sale of electricity beyond the current contract, correct?
Yes.
And that offer describes itself as an avoided cost offer, doesn't it? And if it would help, I'll refer you to the first sentence of the second paragraph.
Okay, I see that.
So, and in particular, just for the commission's edification, Kelp says, Kelp intends to extend its relationship under PURPA with another 20-year contract extension at the appropriate PURPA avoided cost for its existing facilities, right?
I see that here.
And then attached to that is a proposed calculation from Kelp's perspective of the avoided cost, right?
I see proposed rates. Are they at the avoided cost? I'm not sure about that.
Well, they're at what Kelp believes is the avoided cost at that time. Would you agree with that?
Not necessarily. I don't know if Kelp believes that's the avoided costs.
Fair enough. Let's look at Exhibit D. You there? Are you there, sir?
I'm there.
All right. Exhibit D is a letter dated October 15th, 2021 from Northwestern to Kelp or Rosebud. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that in this letter, Northwestern rejects Kelp's request for a contract extension at the pricing proposed by Kelp?
It says those rates are inconsistent with the current avoided cost rates available to QFs.
Sure. And I understand that's why Northwestern rejected it, but can we agree that Northwestern rejected the rates that Kelp proposed for the reasons you articulated?
It rejected it for a number of reasons.
Fair enough. But it was rejected, right?
Yes.
Okay. In the course of this letter, did Northwestern make a counter proposal as to what it believed the avoided cost rates would be for a contract extension that was requested by Kelp?
No,
I'm just going to object. That question was a little ambiguous as to whether you were asking whether they requested an avoided cost analysis or requested an extension of the contract.
May clarify your.
I'll try to restate the question. Would you agree with me that in response to Kelp's letter, in this letter, Northwestern did not provide Kelp with what it believed the appropriate avoided cost rates would be for the requested contract extension, correct?
Northwestern did not provide an avoided costs. It was not apparent that Kelp is requesting avoided cost rates from Northwestern at this time. And because it was the expiration of the existing contract was so far out into the future, we had proposed to them that we wait until closer to the current contract expiration date.
So Kelp sent you a letter asking to do a contract extension, proposing avoided cost rates, and you did not interpret that as a request to do an extension and engage in a negotiation about the avoided cost rates. Is that right?
We saw a proposal from Kelp for a contract extension, not a request for avoided cost rates.
So when Kelp said, Kelp intends to extend its relationship under PURPA with another 20-year contract extension at the appropriate PURPA avoided costs for its existing facilities, did you just think Kelp was lying there?
No, we are requesting that in order to calculate accurate avoided costs, we wait until we're closer to the current contract expiration date.
But at that point, so because of that, at that point in time, Northwestern did not provide Kelp with what you believed appropriate avoided costs would be, correct?
Correct. We did not provide avoided cost rates at that time.
All right. And consistent with what you just said, again, Northwestern tells Kelp that and I'm now reading from the very bottom, as the expiration of the current contract draws closer, Kelp may request an updated avoided cost calculation and a draft PPA to review, correct?
Yes, it states that.
So would you agree with me that a person reading this letter from Kelp would conclude that Kelp's next step should be to wait until 6 months prior to the expiration of the contract, at which time Northwestern would entertain a request for updated avoided cost and be willing to provide a draft PPA? Is that a reasonable conclusion based on what Northwestern said in this letter?
What I would say is that Kelp's actions are not dictated by Northwestern Energy in this case. And when we're talking about unilaterally signed PPA and the various requirements to establish a LEO are on behalf of it's the QF's actions that establish that. It's not Northwestern's actions that establish that. And I understand the LEO asserted here by Kelp is April of 2022.
So let me just take this back a second. Would Northwestern generally prefer that QFs try to negotiate with Northwestern to resolve the avoided cost disputes that may occur? Or would it be your preference that we simply never talk to you until we present you with a unilateral demand for avoided cost?
The idea is that we enter into negotiations before we go to the commission in a litigated case.
But under this unwritten policy, you were refusing to do that until 6 months prior to the expiration of the contract, or December of 2023, correct?
Objection, he's misstating the facts in the record. The letters he ends up showing and are attached to the exhibit show that we engaged in negotiations before 6 months.
It seems to me that what Mr. Nelson is asking is the position stated by the company. What you were referring to is what the company did after the fact. But I think he's accurate in pointing out and said, what does the letter say? What happened at that time?
Yeah, and that's fine if he wants to rephrase his question for that.
Okay.
I think that was my question.
I don't think to that point in time that you're referring to. I think you were saying it broadly that we hadn't attempted to negotiate at all.
I will attempt to rephrase. Would you agree with me that as reflected in the letter of October 15th, 2021, Northwestern's stated position to Kelp was that Northwestern would not negotiate with Kelp or provide a draft PPA until 6 months prior to the conclusion of the current contract, or approximately December 31st, 2023?
I disagree with that. It's not that Northwestern would not negotiate. It's that Northwestern preferred to wait until closer to the contract termination to provide accurate avoided costs.
And the time frame that you wanted to wait for was 6 months prior to the extension, right?
It also says depending on the complexity of the matter. So the 6 months is not a hard date. It's depending on the complexity of the matter.
And notwithstanding any of that, notwithstanding the complexity issues, you received a proposal from Kelp in September 2021, excuse me. You received a proposal from Kelp earlier in January of 2020. I can't speak. In January 2021. And in response to both of those proposals, Northwestern never provided a counter proposal as to what you believed an appropriate PPA would be or an appropriate avoided cost would be, correct?
Yes, because it was so far in advance of the contract termination.
Okay. All right. So if Northwestern has a capacity need that is significant, and as we discussed earlier, Northwestern will oftentimes put out RFPs many years in advance of a known capacity shortfall in order to allow projects to be constructed. If you don't negotiate with an existing QF until 6 months prior to the expiration of the contract, doesn't that virtually ensure that those existing QFs will never be entitled to a capacity payment at the start of the new contract, because Northwestern will have acquired the necessary capacity far in advance of that to make sure that you are able to serve customers?
The capacity payment for a QF would be based on the capacity need of the utility, and Northwestern Energy has needed capacity for a number of years. So to the extent that we say there's a QF, for example, that expires 10 years from now and seeks to renew a contract in 10 years from now and receive a capacity payment, that seems far too far into the future. It doesn't necessarily mean the QF would not receive a capacity payment. It just is dependent upon the capacity need of Northwestern at the time that they reestablish their LEO, theoretically.
Okay, let me try this again. I'm not sure we got an answer to that. Would you agree with me that if Northwestern's policy, which I think makes total sense, to be clear, is that you want to try to secure any capacity, address any capacity shortfall well in advance of that capacity shortfall occurring, perhaps many years in advance, because you need to have time to construct a contract. If that's the way that Northwestern runs the business for an existing QF. If you can't even negotiate until 6 months before your contract expires, that essentially virtually ensures that at least at the beginning of that contract, that QF will not be entitled to a capacity payment because all the capacity you need would have been secured well in advance of that, so that the system and your ability to serve your customers is not at risk, right?
Objections, compound question. I think there was like 3 or 4 questions in that.
Mr. Chairman, that was testimony on the part of legal counsel. I would request you direct legal counsel to not testify from the bench and to ask direct questions. Thank you.
I'd second that.
Mr. Nelson, do you have a response to that?
I don't think it was testimony. I think it was a question, and it was a question that ended with the word correct, which is the way you ask cross-examination questions. But so I don't think it is objectionable cross-examination.
And I would just reiterate, I believe that was a narrative, not a question. And I think the record will show that.
Not being intimately familiar with the legal definition of narrative, it struck me that his scenario that he was asking opinion on was outlining a set of circumstances that would necessarily follow one from another, but it did seem to be quite lengthy. Would you care to, if it's possible, to reformulate the question?
Fair enough. Would you agree with me that if Northwestern secures the necessary capacity, well, let me be more particular. Would you agree with me that if in the winter of 2020, the years, right? In the winter of 2023, would you agree with me that prior to that winter, you would expect that Northwestern would have made the arrangements necessary to acquire the capacity you need to serve customers in the summer of 2024?
I'm going over your question here in my head and the timeframes. Northwestern generally tries to be resource adequate. However, I disagree with the premise that a QF would not ever receive a capacity payment because there are existing resources that are rolling off of our supply stack all the time.
Okay, and that wasn't my question. And I'm trying very hard to ask narrow questions to accommodate what the commission and council is asking me to do. So let's try to answer that question. Would you agree with me that in the winter of 2023, in the ordinary course of business, you would expect Northwestern to have acquired the capacity it needs to serve customers in the summer of 2024?
In an ideal scenario, yes, we acquire capacity ahead of time. However, it's not as easy as that.
Would you agree with me that under the RAP methodology that you recommend, the RAP will require Northwestern in advance of the upcoming year to acquire the capacity necessary to serve customers as the RAP is currently proposed?
The proposal in RAP would have fines associated with not being resource adequate.
And if Northwestern has, by the time you get to the winter of 2023, already acquired the capacity that you needed for the summer of 2024, if KELP waited until that time to negotiate an avoided cost rate, wouldn't you agree with me that at least at the beginning of that contract, there would be no capacity need, which would warrant a capacity payment to KELP, right?
I'm just going to object again. I think that was compound as well. It's just extraordinarily difficult, I think, for my witness to be able to follow all that and to give an accurate response.
Yeah, I don't see the compounding there. I see the two questions, the two parts to be inextricably conjoined there, that it's one question. So I'll overrule the objection. Let me say that I appreciate all your objections. I really do. They're good points, and considering them seriously, which is why I've asked for comment back and forth to see if Mr. Nelson was willing to rephrase certain questions. But it seems to me that that is a fair question.
It is possible that at the beginning, Northwestern could be resource adequate when a QF looks to renew its PPA.
Okay. Can we please look at KELP Exhibit 3, which is Mr. Gorman's rebuttal testimony. And I'll call your attention to the very end of that, the very last exhibit, which is MPG 12. You see that, sir?
Mr. Nelson, let me interrupt it at this moment. It is exactly the half point between the time we started and the noon hour at 10:30. Do you expect to go much further with this particular witness? That would be a natural breaking point. Okay, why don't we break now for 15 minutes? So we're off the record until 10:47.
Very good.